Hey, welcome back to American Truck Simulator. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some free tools you can get online that can help you get to the bottom of what may be causing version 1.50 to run really badly on your machine.
Red thunder, like you've seen it a million times.
So yeah, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a couple of tools, one of which comes with Windows and one of which you got to download. And we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of what may be causing any performance issues with your installation of American Truck Simulator or Euro Truck Simulator 2. Specifically, we're going to be using Intel PresentMon. So first things first, let's go ahead and grab that application. So here's a browser I happened to have open earlier on. So type in Intel PresentMon, like so. Now it's absolutely vital that you get this app from Intel. You don't get it from some weird website that you've never used. So this is what I'm recommending you do. And in my case, the top link happened to be Intel. So go ahead and download the application. And then when you've got it, go ahead and install it. I will close my browser and I'll be right back. All right. So assuming that installation went perfectly, and of course I'm sure it would, go ahead and run it. Now I've put a little shortcut on my desktop here. And when you run it, it's going to ask for permission. Just go ahead and say yes. So I've gone and done that. Now I'm running a triple monitor setup here, so I'm going to drag this across to the monitor in question. So I've already had a play around with this app, and so I've got a pretty good idea what the settings are I want to use. So I'm going to suggest that you just stick with the default, with the exception being of the preset. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go across to custom, so here, and then push edit. Right, now this is the this is one set of widgets that you can use. So I guess go ahead and pause the screen. What we really want to see here is CPU busy and GPU busy. Presented FPS is also useful too. The CPU way and the GPU way, that's not so vital. So you can add a new widget. Just click the add new widget button there. Choose the metric that you want, and go ahead and add those widgets. The colors stuff, that doesn't really matter too much. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and customize another feature of PresentMon as it runs on my system, because I want to put the little charts it produces onto a separate monitor. Now you may wish to not bother with that. I'm going to go back to loadout configuration and go into settings here. So what I want to do is turn on windowed mode. By default, it's not enabled, and I've customized the other settings just to suit my own personal circumstances. Have a play around with these. I mean, I don't want to go through these in massive detail. There are videos online about how to use PresentMon. So I'm going to show mine as a windowed mode because I want to drag this across to this particular monitor. So I'm going to minimize that application. The next program I want to run is the Task Manager, and it just so happens that the keyboard commands for this are Shift, Control, Escape. So we do that, and here we go. I'm going to drag it across the right-hand side of my monitor here. Okay, great. So that's filled half. But the other thing I want to do is, rather than just go with the default setting, I want to customize or change the CPU side of things. I'd like it to show the individual cores rather than the overall workload, and you'll see why in a little bit. So over the CPU graph here to the right, go ahead and right mouse, change graph to logical processes. Now, depending on your hardware, on your CPU and your motherboard and all that kind of jazz, you may have a slightly different option. You may have NUMA, show the clusters of CPUs. I think some AMD chips will also show that. I don't have that. I've got an Intel. And last thing, personal preference here, I'm going to go ahead and show kernel times. It can give me a bit of an idea as to what might be happening under the skin. Plus, I just think it looks cool. Right. So that's that. I'm going to leave everything else as completely standard. So now we got to launch our game. Now, when you launch the game, be aware that Intel PresentMon, if you're running it in a Windows mode, will put that window typically not where you need it. I'm going to go ahead and launch. I'm going to go off screen here. Go here, and launch American Truck Simulator. Okay, so after much messing around, I'm able to actually configure my system to show me what I really want to see. I won't bore everyone with the details, but essentially the way that SCS games now treat full screen or windowed mode is, in my opinion, broken, because I cannot hide the SCS window to get to windows behind it. And guess where that Intel PresentMon window appears? That's right behind the game. But moving swiftly onwards, let's take a second to look at this screen here. So what this PresentMon data display screen is showing me, the top chart shows me how long the CPU takes to render every frame. And the bottom chart shows me how long the GPU takes to render every frame. Now the CPU wait time is 0.3 milliseconds, and the GPU wait time is 0.7 milliseconds. Okay, this doesn't really tell us too much, so let's go ahead and jump in the game. Let me see, what am I in? I'm in a Kenworth truck right now, I guess. We're going to do a little bit of driving around, or just at least get the game running. Let's go ahead and hit drive. Let me see. Okay. So, there's not so much going on in the game right now, and I really want to focus your attention on the PresentMon data display top left corner of the monitor. So this shows the CPU busy time, and what that is that's how long the CPU takes to render every frame. And underneath that is the GPU busy time. That shows how long it takes the GPU to render every frame. Okay, well, we're looking at 13 milliseconds, it looks like, for CPU, and 7.5 for the GPU. And what does that tell us? Well, because the CPU has to work harder versus the GPU, CPU is our speed limit. Okay, can we do anything about this? Well, maybe. The reason why the task manager is showing is because that shows the workload that every CPU, real, and virtual core. So this particular Intel doesn't support hyperthreading, and it's turned on. So I've got an 8-core CPU with 16 logical processors. Actually, looking at this chart, the logical processors, the sort of second baby cores, they aren't really doing that much right now, and that's perfect. Core 0 is the thing that's doing most of the work. And looking at this, that core is pretty much pegged at 100%. So even though my overall CPU load is not particularly high right now, it's hovering around about 30%. A speed limit is that one CPU core is kind of working flat out. I would say balls to the wall, but this might be a family show, so I'm not going to say that. Now, our GPU workload is also showing in the task manager. It's the very bottom sort of charty thing on the left hand side, and that's showing the GPU is roughly 60% workload right now. Now, that's about right, although OBS is also recording, and that does have a bit of an impact on there too. Great. So for this particular scene, it takes, I'm going to say, 13 to 15 milliseconds to render a frame, and the GPU spends nearly half of its time kind of not doing so much. What I'm going to do now is drive around for a little bit and see what happens when we start to move around. So, changing my view, and as I change my view, you can see how the CPU busy time changes. Go ahead and jump back in the cabin now. Generally, being in the cabin is a little harder on the CPU than the external view. Let's go ahead and drive out here. Now, The reason why my display on driving is particularly small is not because of anything to hide, but because I might not be driving as professional as perhaps normal. I wonder if we can go left here. Let's find out. Nope. Okay. Now glancing across, I can see that my CPU busy time is kind of hovering about the 20 milliseconds right now. So that tells me that the CPU is still my speed limit. GPU is taking a little longer. I mean, 8.5 milliseconds. That's pretty quick. But my frame rate is now showing 42 frames per second as opposed to the 70 something we were showing earlier. So as you drive around, so the impact on the game is noticeable. Now, I'm not going to do this, but if you drive around at 90 miles an hour everywhere, you're asking a lot more of the hardware because the map has to be loaded in quicker. Okay, so far so good. But what if it rains? Let's make it rain. Okay, so now it's going to be raining hard. And let's take a look. Are we seeing a difference in CPU load? Yeah, I think we might be. I really think we are. I'm going to go ahead and move off here because I can turn right under red. Thanks, Americans. We're now up to 27, 28 to 30 milliseconds. That's about twice what it was before. Oh, in other words, my machine's ability to produce frames is roughly half what it was. And so we're sort of seeing, we were seeing in the 30s there. We're now back up to 44. I'm going to skid around here. It's a little roundabout. Let's actually brake. Let's try not to crash. Oh, Prius, I don't mind crashing into that. So, I don't know how well this is going to show in the video, but let me just say that the experience behind the wheel is it's laggy, it's jerky, it's not much fun, and I'm going really quickly on purpose because we're asking a lot from the hardware. Let's go ahead and see if we can skid. Oh yeah, yep, we did a bit of a slide. See how when you do something demanding in the physics, it can make things a little slower. I think I probably need to park somewhere and we'll just take a look at the scene. So weather, or in particular rain, has an impact on your system. In fact, it's one of the biggest impacts, but I believe my weather is set to be ultra quality, and you can reduce the quality there, and there's an impact, or you can reduce the load on the system. I typically find medium or high weather seems to be about the best compromise between performance and how well it looks. But your system will vary, so by all means play around with those settings, and if you've got PresentMon, run PresentMon at the same time as you change some of the settings. I'll show you how you do that in just a second. Let's just find somewhere that we can park. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and park up here on the right. I'm just going to stop up here. I mean, it might not be parking, but... Let's actually drive through here like we stole the truck, and then I want to turn left and look back towards the main road. Okay. There's a reason why I'm stopping here. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn off my lights, parking brake on, and shut it down. 40 frames a second, but I'm going to look left in the view so we can see what's happening around us. Right, the frames have dropped. I wanted the frames per second to drop because we've got a mirror in there, we've got glass, we've got enough going on the display that we're working this. And so take a look at the CPU busy time. Yeah, 28 milliseconds. That's pretty consistent. The GPU busy on the bottom chart is also pretty consistent right now. The GPU wait time is moving around a bit, and that's That's more or less in sync with CPU busy. I mean, it should be close, but it's not quite. Okay. Let me go ahead and make it stop storming. So, we were looking... Yeah, I'm looking for a drop. Now, there's still a bit of water on the window, and as that dries off, at least as the game says, it's gonna improve. So, we're looking at 42 frames per second. I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording, and I'll be right back when it's dried up. Okay, we're back. And I'm seeing a small increase in frames per second, but it moves around a little bit. So typically we're looking at 44, 45, so 10% difference. So the frame rate drops occasionally. So that's what that is. 10% give or take, but it's not that consistent. What I'm now going to do is jump into the settings, options, graphics. And the other thing I know that can cause, or can seemingly cause a bit of an issue is the vegetation detail. So we're set to be high right now. I'm going to go ahead and set that to be low, hit apply, and go back in to the view. Now there's not that much vegetation showing on the screen, but there is some, so let's take a look. Okay, shame it's not looking in the same view, but let's go ahead and do that. That's close enough, right? So another couple of frames per second, maybe 3, and the thing as well, when you launch the game, you got to give it a little bit of time to sort of settle in for the traffic to be generated, and sometimes there's an economy sync as well, which takes a bit of an impact. Well, we're seeing a small improvement, just a small one, but it's, I mean, 42 to 46, it was possibly a little lower before. Okay. Now watch what happens when you switch to an external view. So, typically, it speeds up. There we go. There's not having to render the dashboard. There's a lot of detail and textures typically in the dashboard. Some mod trucks are known to cause real performance issues when you're in the cabin, but they get a lot smoother outside the cabin. And this one, the Kenworth K100E, is not particularly bad for it. But we're still seeing another 10% frame rate improvement. Now, I'm not suggesting that you drive external view all the time. For me, a lot of the appeal of the game is that you can drive inside the cabin. Now let's look at anti-aliasing. First things first, let's go back to here. Let's turn my vegetation detail back up to high. I'm not going to go through every one of these settings because there's a lot of settings to go through. You can have a go in your own time. Look at how your machine performs. Things I found that make a difference are weather detail, and vegetation detail. Oh yeah, and traffic. So if you have a traffic mod, generally speaking, it's really taxing on the CPU. That texture doesn't look great on the vegetation. Mid to high 50s, okay. I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad. See how our CPU 0 is still pretty much constantly pegged? Yeah. Okay. Now let's look at anti-aliasing. So I'm going to do the real extreme. We're going to go from full, seemingly anti-aliasing. We're going to just disable it. And then down here, we're going to turn off anisotropic filtering, whatever the hell that means. I'm going to leave everything else as it is. As you see, I've got most things set to be pretty high. Leave everything else. Let's just disable the anti-aliasing. Now, my expectations for this are, this is almost solely done on the GPU. And seeing as my GPU is pretty much not having to do much, I don't think we're going to see any difference, any material difference in how well the game runs. Okay, let's take a look. It's a little slower. Oh, that's weird. Tiny bit slower, maybe about the same. Does the game look worse? Yeah, I think it does. Doesn't look quite as crisp. So in this case, if your game is CPU limited, and your graphics card is laughing at the workload you're trying to give it, and pretty much in this case, the CPU renders a frame in about 20 milliseconds, and the GPU takes about a third of that. So in theory, my GPU could render this game at about 150 frames per second, or certainly match my monitor's refresh rate of 144. But it's not, because my CPU is too weak. I'm going to go back in and change that. And the other thing I want to do... Oh, hello, kitty. So just as an aside, my little kitten, it's not so little anymore, has just been deposited in the room, so I think he's been a bad little kitten. I'm going to go ahead and change the scaling to be 400%. And just imagine Dr. Evil putting his pinky to his mouth, 400%. I'm also going to change the reflection scaling to 200. There's not that much chrome we can see. It won't make that big of a difference, but let's go ahead and do that. We're happy with those settings. And what we're now going to do is work that graphics card quite a bit harder. And possibly the CPU, if the CPU is involved in shunting data to and from the graphics card. Right, let's give this a go. Okay, so I'm going to take a sip of tea whilst we wait for that to populate and fill in and do all its fun stuff. All right. Makes an impact of frames per second. We've increased the workload on our GPU by quite an amount. It's now 40 milliseconds to process a frame, and it was a lot less than that just a few seconds ago. But our CPU time is more or less the same. It's not processing data any quicker. It's giving it to the GPU. The GPU is going, yep, I can do that. It's taking twice as long, but it can still do it. So again, if you have a CPU limited system, crank up your graphics to the maximum. It's going to be okay to a point. However, I'm going to reset that back because I don't notice that big of a difference in graphical quality. Let's go back to here. Oh, I also forgot I needed to do the anisotropic filtering. Let's do that. So that was a very quick and dirty run through of how, if your game is CPU limited, you can show this using a couple of free programs. Now, to be fair, Task Manager also shows this. It shows that CPU 0 is maxed out. It can't do any more work in a given time period. But how does that relate to the game? Yeah, look at that. We're back down to 19, 20 milliseconds to do a frame. So there are a couple of things that we can try to smooth out your game. Now, one of them, unfortunately, it is really hard to show the impact by screen recording because it doesn't capture it, and that is lossless scaling. I do have a video on lossless scaling. I don't think it's my finest effort, but I do have a video. I may well rework it, but right now I'm going to go ahead and turn lossless scaling on. Okay. So the frame rate according to the game is now basically double what the frame rate is reporting in PresentMon. So I'm looking at 94 frames a second, 1994 frames a second. It's not quite double, but really close to it. In terms of workload, we'll look at the Task Manager. We see a small uptick in our CPU is quite distinctive, and if you want it to be obvious, look at the GPU workload. It's now up to 70%, 65, 70%. But PresentMon's not showing any difference. Our GPU busy time is still pretty close to 8 milliseconds, maybe a tiny little bit higher. Our CPU busy time is still 20 milliseconds. The game to drive, to look at, looks a lot smoother. It's transforms the experience, and this is just with lossless scaling set to double the frame rate. You can also triple it. But like I say, I can't easily show that because it doesn't want to record the difference that it makes. That's number one. And the second thing you can do is you can get down into Windows or you can do various things. You can tell it not to use Core 0. Core 0 is used by a lot of functions in Windows. In fact, it's Windows' favorite core. So you could tell it, you know what, shunt the game onto another core. But looking at my task manager, would it make that much of a difference? Would it really? It likely won't. And I've played around with an application called Process Lasso, and I enjoy this application. It works very well for certain things. You might squeeze a small boost in performance from American Truck Simulator, but I'm talking 52 frames per second versus 5150. So, not material. But here's an idea. This is something I do on my personal rig. Take a deep breath. I run the game at 30 frames per second. Now I control that at the driver side of things, so I basically cap the game at 30 frames a second. But lossless scaling doubles that to 60. And we've never seen this game running at less than 30 frames per second. In all the time I've been playing around with it, changing the weather, changing the settings, it's always been at least 30 frames per second. Excuse me, I got to tell you that actually it will drop below 30 frames a second. You know, you're in the rain, it's busy, you're in somewhere like San Francisco, you might see high 20s, but that's in its rarity. So lossless scaling gives me a really smooth gameplay effect. And, I mean, it kind of doubles your frame rate for $7. Okay. That's enough from me. I'm going to go ahead and turn off lossless scaling right there. That's done that. And I'm going to go ahead and close the video. So I'm going to call it for this one. But if you like what you see and you want to see more of this, go ahead and leave me a comment below, because this topic has been on my mind for a while, and there's further investigation work we can do. And I am no scientist, I am no expert at these things, but at least now I know the game is CPU limited. There's no point in me buying a different graphics card. I've got to buy a new processor and motherboard and RAM. Alright everyone, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Hope that you enjoyed this and got something from it. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.